Hello YouTubers, welcome to episode 3 of the Refined Outlaw Revue. I hope you all don't mind. I'm just going to be drinking a little coffee, and as little as possible I'm going to be using this thing as I am trying to give up cigarettes. Anyway, it's an appropriate stepping stone because today we're going to be talking about one of the great works in addiction literature. It's maybe my favorite book. This is Dennis Johnson's book of short stories, Jesus' Son. Jesus' Son by Dennis Johnson is a book that I feel a really deep personal connection with. Along with Infinite Jest and the short stories of Raymond Carver, it was one of the three books that I took with me from a drug treatment facility here in Houston into a sober living house where I stayed for 6 months in the early days of my recovery. Dennis Johnson's book of short stories, Jesus' Son, though many people have considered it a novel, and it could be read either way. The protagonist, never named except for the acronym of Fuckhead, which is given to him by his friend George in the book. The narrator is more than likely the same throughout these stories. Though that's never really confirmed. I mean, these could be standalone stories of similar young men addicted to drugs and drifting through the Midwest. I'm going to be consulting my new little City Lights notebook here that my friend Lindsay Keeling picked up for me on a visit to San Francisco recently. She also got me a little pocketbook, Howl by Allen Ginsberg, which is just amazing to have a copy of that from a City Lights bookstore. Such an iconic place. I really identified with its protagonist, this kind of vagabond young man experimenting with drugs. Well, I think he crosses over pretty early from experimenting to full-blown addiction, drifting along these crazy characters populating a chaotic life. And the way the book is written, the chaotic narration really mirrors the addict's state of mind. The title, Jesus' Son, comes from the Velvet Underground song Heroin. And it begins with a quote from that song by Lou Reed, "When I'm rushing on my run and I feel just like Jesus' son." I always thought that was a great line. And it's an amazing title for the book. There's echoes of Christianity throughout the book, and these ideas of redemption are integral to the plot without ever being overstated. It's always very subtle. I believe Dennis Johnson was himself, I think, identified as a Christian, but he's not your usual Christian, and this is not your usual vision of redemption or of drug addiction. What makes this book so great is that it avoids the cliches. There's in the annals of drug literature, there are many failures. In my own writings on the subject, in my own writings from my own experiences of addiction and recovery, I encounter these difficulties. There's the pitfalls of romanticism. You don't want to romanticize or glamorize the drug use, and worst of all, cliche. I mean, this is a subject that's been written about a lot. Dennis Johnson, like William Burroughs, succeeds because he neither glamorizes or condemns the drug use. It's almost incidental. It's part of these characters' lives. It's part of their day-to-day existence, and yet the book is much more about the themes of searching for something. And sometimes that search takes form in the way of drugs, searching for these new experiences. But towards the end of the book, as he enters a tentative stage of recovery, it takes form in something much more profound, something spiritual, if you will. Characters searching for the immaculate fix, as Burroughs would have called it. Jesus' Son, as I just said, definitely avoids these traps, these pitfalls that a lot of addiction-related literature fall into. It's the story of life at the bottom. It's the story of life at rock bottom. And it tells its tale unromantically. But paradoxically, it describes a life which is beautiful and romantic. So that's the paradox at the end of the book. These very stripped down stories of murder, abortion, overdose, burglary, he's even a peeping Tom at a certain point. And yet throughout these really kind of unsavory moments, we glimpse something divine and beautiful and romantic in the purest sense of the word. As I said, Jesus' Son was a book I read a lot during my addiction. And, as I read it, I imagined myself as this character. There's not many experiences outside of the murder that occurs in the book. There's not many experiences that I haven't had some version of in my own life. I mentioned I took Raymond Carver, was one of the other books I took with me into recovery, and that's no accident that I chose those two books together. Raymond Carver was actually a teacher to Dennis Johnson. I believe Dennis Johnson went to the Iowa Writers Workshop where Carver was a teacher and wrote. And he would even let Dennis Johnson stay in his office at night, and they'd get drunk together and talk about literature. So they were two guys that knew each other in their addictions, but I believe that they also influenced each other positively. Particularly Carver influenced Dennis to get better, to recover, and to become what he called a citizen of life. I love that term, and I use it to describe my own recovery often. I say, I am a newly appointed citizen of life. That's the really fundamental shift that happens when you get sober. It's like in addiction, you kind of opt out of life. But there's a kind of pain inherent in quitting a drug or alcohol that you've become addicted to. There's a pain that rends your soul. Your individuality seems to be, just torn off as if with a paring knife. And I wasn't looking for some kind of perfect state of sober Buddhahood. I just wanted my life to stop being chaos. I wanted to stop hurting the people I loved. I wanted to stop doing harm. But I didn't want to lose what made me me. That's why Carver and Dennis Johnson were so important, because I felt they became more true to themselves through their recovery. I felt that their writing became sharper. A lot of us writers have this fear attached to getting sober. Like, we're going to lose our edge. We're going to lose part of our mystique or something. And that all turns out to be trash. Dennis Johnson himself felt that way. And he came to the conclusion that, he wasn't writing at all when he was all fucked up. He'd written something like 10 stories in as many years, maybe less. He was published early on. His book of poetry was published early in his life, but then during his addiction, it was like this big black hole. It was a void in which he published very little. And I related to that. I remember, during one of the worst times of my addiction, I was living in Austin, Texas, and I was very, very depressed that one of my pieces hadn't been accepted by this magazine I'd submitted to. And, I was very down on myself, and I was down on myself as a writer, and, just using it as an excuse to indulge more heavily in heroin and other drugs. And I came to find out that not only had my piece been submitted, but they'd been desperately trying to get in touch with me to pay me for my work. But I was just so out of it that I didn't realize that I didn't realize they were trying to get in touch with me. I was completely dead to the world. Luckily, they ended up publishing that piece. I don't think I ever got paid for it, but seeing it in print, seeing that, it really encouraged me. And it was the very beginnings of realizing that, I need to change my life. I need to get over this, or I'm going to die. And then no one's going to read anything I wrote, and I'm never going to get these stories out of me that I fundamentally believe need to be told, that I need to tell them for myself, and I need to tell them for other people, hopefully to benefit. And that brings me to a part, Jesus' Son. In the very first story, one of the best stories, towards the end, it's called Car Crash While Hitchhiking. And it's the story of our drifter just trying to get a ride, in the rain. And he gets picked up by a certain Oldsmobile, and it stops and slows for him, and he could tell by the sweet voices of the family inside that they would have an accident in the storm. It's a story about death, but told in the most hopeful, beautiful way. At the end of the story, it cuts to This character, some years later, admitted to detox at Seattle General Hospital. "Are you hearing unusual sounds or voices?" the doctor asked. "Oh God, it hurts," the boxes of cotton screamed. "Not exactly," I said. "Not exactly," he said. "Now, what does that mean?" "I'm not ready to go into all that," I said. A yellow bird fluttered close to my face and my muscles grabbed. Now I was flopping like a fish. When I squeezed shut my eyes, hot tears exploded from the sockets. When I opened them, I was on my stomach. "How did the room get so white?" I asked. A beautiful nurse was touching my skin. "These are vitamins," she said, and drove the needle in. It was raining. Gigantic ferns leaned over us. The forest drifted down a hill. I could hear a creek rushing down among rocks. And you ridiculous people, you expect me to help you. Actually, we do, Dennis. We do expect you to help. And you did. Dennis, you helped me. This thin little book, I mean, it's really quite short. I think that at the time his publishers were pretty upset with him because they were expecting like a full-fledged novel. Instead, they got this thin little volume of short stories which were written under duress. He was having trouble with the IRS. He needed to get some money for his family, and Johnson wrote this really in the crunch. So Jesus' Son was also made into a movie in which Dennis Johnson has a little cameo, which is cute. And I think that as far as movies based on books go, it's really good. It's really good. It's different from the book. Obviously, the question over whether the narrator is one person or many is unequivocally decided, and Billy Crudup plays the main character. Samantha Morton plays his kind of druggy girlfriend. It's an all-star cast. Jack Black as Georgie the orderly. You've got Dennis Leary. You've got Dennis Hopper, an amazing scene at the hospital towards the end. And Holly Hunter as well. It's a great movie. It's really worth checking out, but please read the book first. I think you will enjoy the movie much more, or maybe you'll despise it because you'll form such a connection with the book. That's possible. But I think that as far as movies based on books go, it's one of the better ones. Probably one of the lines that stuck with me the most in Jesus' Son is towards the end of the book. He's going to Narcotics Anonymous meetings. He's even started seeing a woman. And he's working at Beverly Home, which is a home for the elderly. This is the last paragraph of the book. He's amongst these old people, many of them knocking on death's door, and he's finding that in helping others, he's really helping himself, and that he's healing these many scars little by little. And ultimately, it doesn't matter what the recovery program is, if it's AA, if it's faith-based, if you're doing cognitive behavioral therapy. The two fundamental things are to take responsibility for your actions, for harming others, for cheating and lying and stealing. Take that responsibility, own it, and then do something to help others. Be of service to people. And it might seem like an altruistic thing to do, but it's really quite selfish, because in helping other people, you start to heal yourself. So this is the last paragraph of Dennis Johnson's Jesus' Son. All these weirdos, and me getting a little better every day right in the midst of them. I had never known, never imagined for a heartbeat that there might be a place for people like us. Thank you very much for joining me today on the Refined Outlaw Review. We've got some exciting episodes coming up soon. Sorry it's been a little bit since my last post. I've been reading, and I'm right at the end of my final semester at the University of Houston downtown. So I've got graduation coming up and just been busy. But I promise I won't leave you guys hanging. We have some awesome stuff coming up. We're going to do Roberto Bolaño's The Savage Detectives, one of my all-time favorite books. So there's a lot on the horizon. Thank you for spending this time with me on this mass consensual hallucination known as the internet. You are presented with many choices, and your choice to be here with me is greatly appreciated. Be sure to give us a like and subscribe if this video was to your liking. I appreciate all of you YouTubers. Have a great day, night, whatever it is, and wherever you are.